Thank you so much for having me and for the chance to continue the conversation that some of us began this morning in the first presentation. And coming at it a little bit different angle this time, still trying to think about that overarching theme of isolation in our culture. How do we think about reconnecting? There's a lot of talk about community and community building, and we hear this in the church, we hear this in other organizations. We have a sense, I think, that we are culturally fragmented. We're fragmented across all kinds of social and political differences. We're fragmented just because we can't find time to spend with each other. All sorts of things create a sense of a fragmented culture. So the question that the earlier talk and this talk are both really trying to get at is, what does it look like to rebuild community, to address those issues of isolation? And specifically then, for our conversation this afternoon, asking the question around technology. What does technology do for us in terms of either, as I put it here, connecting us or pulling us apart? You know, of course, any answer is probably going to be, well, some of both. But I want us to explore it a little bit deeper than that and try to get at those aspects that may well be pulling us apart when we think it's connecting us, and perhaps vice versa. So that's kind of the main theme and the main topic, and because of that, focusing a little more directly on youth culture in this talk, because as many of you may know, as you watch your own children or grandchildren or children of the church adapt to new technology, their adaptation is like this. The adaptation of many of us who are a bit older, our adaptation is not quite so fast. So what we're watching and what I'm watching with my teenage and almost teenage boys is a movement into a world of technology that I'm rapidly always trying to catch up with. I'm always one step behind where their new mode of communication and connection is happening. And so it's important for us to be in on that conversation and not simply imagine I'm an old dog who doesn't need to learn new tricks. But in fact, this is an important way we're going to keep connection alive. But we want to do it in the right ways. The first thing I want to show you is this moment, which was a bit of an epiphany moment for me as a parent. So the young man in the fake mustache and the tie is my 9-year-old son, 8 years old at the time. And he was giving a school presentation, and as often happens at those things, I was ready with my cell phone at hand to videotape what was happening. So I'll play you this tiny clip. You don't need the audio, you can imagine. He's telling a story, and they're going to be acting it out here. And the point is this: I'm there with my cell phone, and I look around, and there's a whole line of parents behind me and beside me. And you know what all of us are doing, right? We're doing this, right? Wherever my cell phone is, it's right here. We're doing this. And I thought, this is great, right? Because I can then, so Luke's mom is a teacher, right? She couldn't be there. So I can bring this back, and tonight I can show her, and then she gets to participate. And I'm thinking connection, right? She gets to kind of be a part of what's going on because I'm there doing this. And it was only afterward that I thought, my experience was I was seeing my son do his thing, right? Because he was on my screen. But you know what he was seeing? Right? That's what he saw. He didn't see me. He saw the black back of my phone. He didn't see my eyes on him. He saw this. And I realized that my attempt to create a moment that I could then preserve and later enjoy, and I'm going to tell you the truth, I've never gone back and rewatched this except to use it as part of this presentation, right? And I don't know about you, but I end up filming all sorts of things like that I think, oh, later I'm really going to want to go back and, right? And it just becomes this huge set of files in iPhoto. And then I don't go back and look at them, you know? And if I do, it just seems like such a huge task because now I have so many images and so many videos, I don't even know how to organize them, and then I just close it out again. So my idea that this was all about connecting us, saving a moment, preserving something that was going to be lovely, all right, in the end, I thought maybe it backfired. And maybe, in fact, what happened is I missed a moment. I didn't save a moment, I missed it. And part of why I missed the moment is that my son didn't see me seeing him. So this is one of the places where technology can be tricky. Because we think it's doing one thing, and it may be that it's doing something else. And so it involves a level of attentiveness for us, and an attentiveness that we sometimes don't give it. Here's another example. Some of you may know last weekend and the weekend before, the Austin City Limits Music Festival was happening in Austin. So I try to get out every year and catch some bands, and it's lots of fun. And so, you know, again, you get out there and you've got your cell phone and you want to catch a picture of one of your favorite bands. This is the Mowglis. You can't really tell. If you don't know the Mowglis, you should look them up because they're really great. So I'm watching the Mowglis, and they're playing this fantastic song, and I get out my phone, and I snap a picture, right? So I'm behind these people, again, with my phone in front of me. Now, all those little circles, you can't see it real well unless we shut down the lights. Those are all people with cell phones in front of me. And if you have been to a concert recently, at least this kind of concert, that's what you see. And sometimes it's immensely frustrating because you can't see the band. What you can see is a row of cell phones in front of you, all held up like this, right? Just in your line of vision. So what you end up getting to see is the image of the band on somebody else's cell phone in front of you, which is not exactly what you came to see, right? But all of us are wanting to preserve the moment, right? And notice again what's happening. We think we're connecting. We think, I'm preserving this so that it can be more meaningful to me because I can go back and look at it later. I get to preserve it, right? But even as I'm doing that, I'm missing the chance to actually live it. I'm missing the chance to be in it at that moment and to have an experience that later I conjure from memory and I tell a story, which is how we used to do it. Right? You're in the moment, you have the experience, and later you have memories. And you say, oh, I remember this fantastic concert the Mowglis gave at ACL one year, and you know, the crowd was crazy, and then when they sang this song, it was so cool, right? You tell the story. Again, I haven't gone back and looked at these pictures afterward. I didn't really have reason to, except at the moment I thought, I want to preserve this, I want to capture it. But precisely because I wanted to capture it, I was also missing it. So these are the kinds of questions we have to ask. Some of you may know Stephen Thompson. He does NPR Music, so he does the All Songs Considered program for NPR. He had this to say about cell phones at concerts that I thought was really interesting and insightful, especially from somebody who's just a music critic. And I say just a music critic. He's not by profession a philosopher or a theologian. He's not trying to think deep thoughts about how human beings can connect. But notice what he says here. Live performances are improved immeasurably by the presence of a rapt, distraction-free audience. Right? Even that is something to note. The performance itself is enhanced by an audience whose focus is on what's going on, right? An audience being drawn in. We're not just spectators in a good performance. We're part of the performance as the audience, right? And so the performance itself is enhanced when you have a rapt audience drawn in, and we feel it as an audience. You know, you've probably had that experience, and certainly the performers feel it. And he says, the more we keep our phones in our pockets, the way we would during a good movie or play, the more we can attach ourselves to the music and connect with it, be it rhythmically or emotionally or even spiritually. I love my cell phone, and I've certainly been guilty of failing to detach myself from it when art is going on around me. Notice the language again, right? Where is attachment and where is the detachment? The ability to attach to the moment involved also a discipline by which he detached from his phone. And he's confessing that's hard to do. It's hard for me to do. It's probably hard for many of us to do. But as with any human interaction, the best moments in life and music happen when everyone involved is fully plugged into the experience, and by extension, unplugged from everything else. Right? So again, this is, he's not a culture commentator. He's just a guy who loves music. But he's a guy who loves music and is noticing some things about how our experience of music is changing. Because in order to attach to what's happening, we have to have enough discipline to detach from some other things, right? So that's where we're sort of probing that intersection of technology and our experience of the world, and the fact that sometimes the very way we think theology is, that technology is helping us, it's actually hindering us, right? It's actually cutting us off when we think it's connecting us. Facebook. Does Facebook connect or does it disconnect? And in a few minutes, I'll open us up for some conversation. So you don't have to answer. We can presume that's a rhetorical question for the moment, right? But it's a good question to ask, because I think there are a number of people who would immediately say Facebook's all about connecting. So why would you even suggest that it's disconnecting, right? But the more we think about it, the more we experience, the more we use it, it starts to become a little less clear. Even in its ubiquity, is it connecting us or is it disconnecting us? So again, I throw that out rhetorically. We'll have a chance to kind of discuss that in a few minutes. I'm not going to read through this whole quote, but there was a really nice article in The Atlantic last year talking about Facebook and talking about what it does. And one of the things that this person noted, and a lot of research is now getting done on this, is that people who engage Facebook through actually making personal comments about other people's posts often find it very connecting. But the ways that a lot of us, maybe most of us, use Facebook, where it's simply a matter of going through and viewing what we see and occasionally clicking a like, what they find is, in fact, this makes us feel less connected, and often it makes us feel very dissatisfied with our own lives, because of the ways that Facebook is a means by which we curate a certain presentation of ourselves. And if all I'm doing is going and looking at all the cool things that my friends are doing, it can leave me feeling like, man, my life is pretty boring, you know? Wow, I'm really not keeping up, because look at that, wow, look at the meal my friend is eating this evening at that cool restaurant, you know? Right? There's always the people who want to take pictures of their food and post it on Facebook or Twitter or wherever else, you know? Wow, you know, and even more so when it's, look at what I cooked my family for dinner tonight, you know? Oh, awesome, wow, you know, boy, I wish I had time to do that. You know, we were lucky to heat up some, I don't know, veggie burgers, yeah, right? So the ways that we engage technology sometimes themselves determine the different kinds of outcomes. But the fact that a good number of people who engage Facebook regularly actually come away feeling depressed is something we ought to notice, right? Depression doesn't feel like connection. Depression feels like I now feel disconnected because my life doesn't match up to these people who I count as friends, or at least the people I'm trying to be connected to. But now I feel disconnected because their life looks so much better than mine. Right? So the question, is technology itself the problem? Is technology the problem? Is it not the problem? Is it usable in a way that it doesn't disconnect us? It's easy to try to find an answer that says, yep, technology is the problem. And then we can just kind of back out of these different movements of technology, these different waves that wash over us, and we can feel good about detaching from them because we're pretty sure technology is the thing that's going wrong. But honestly, when we're honest about our own engagement with technology, it's not that easy. It's not easy enough to say, it's too easy to say technology itself is simply the problem. Not to mention the fact that if that's the only word we have to say, then we're going to have generations of people whom the church can't reach because our only message is technology's the problem. So we have to have more than that. But at the same time, we don't have to be simplistic adopters of every new technology that comes out. We need to be the place that is thinking clearly and carefully about what technology does, how to use it well, how it can be used badly, and indeed to think about the sort of disciplining of the soul that's involved in using technology well. It really is like a spiritual practice to think about, how do I use my cell phone? It's a spiritual discipline. If I pop out my cell phone every time I have a spare moment, right? And I could very easily do this, right? The time when this talk ends and I walk out to my car, I could very easily pop out my cell phone and check something, right? Check email, check a sports score. I mean, it's going to take me like a minute and a half to walk out to my car. But the truth is, if I'm not conscious, if I'm not thinking about this as a spiritual discipline, boom, that's where I go. It's the time filler. It just fills the gap, which means that I lose that space of silence. I use that space that's kind of empty, and I lose the possibilities that come with there being empty space in our days. So it really is a matter of our ability to be attentive and our ability to engage certain kinds of disciplines around the use of technology. So if we can't just say, okay, technology is the problem, let's just stay away from it, what do we do, right? What sort of theological resources do we have to bring to bear? I love this passage from Matthew. This is Jesus talking. He says, "Therefore every scribe who has been trained for the kingdom of heaven is like the master of a household who brings out of his treasure what is new and what is old." And I think, there you go. Right? This is always the challenge. It was the challenge for Jesus. Jesus was bringing some crazy new stuff. But it didn't mean the old was going to go away. It didn't mean all of the ways of Judaism and Torah and all of the things that made Jesus who he was were things now to be left behind because the cool new stuff has arrived. But it also meant, don't be afraid of the new things I'm bringing. Don't be afraid of the new. But the good scribe, right? And what is a scribe? A scribe is a recorder who carries our memories. As a good scribe, you pick up both, right? And you carry them along. So I take this verse as a way of helping me think about what it looks like to bring these two things together and to recognize it's always been part of the work of the gospel to carry forward the old and figure out what in the new is worth embracing. So one way of posing the question, or maybe one way of starting to pose the question about what's worth embracing in the new, if technology is not just a problem, maybe it helps for us to pause and just ask, what is technology? What do we mean by that term? Right? And we can go back pretty far, which I did. I went back all the way, right, to the Greek fundamental term here, techne. And that term techne is craft. It's craftsmanship. So technology is a kind of craftsmanship. It's a sort of crafting of things, usually forms of tools of one sort or another, and of course today often electronic tools. But in the beginning, techne was about bringing something forth. So all of the great crafts involved techne. And so techne gives us tools to encounter the world, to engage the world, to mediate our relationship with the world. Plows, hammers, spears, bowls, right? The sort of stuff of early humanity, to factories and automobiles and machine guns and drones, the stuff of today. All of that's technology. All of it is techne in that sense of the things that we craft to help mediate our experience of the world, whether it's to help us till the soil or to help us blow up an enemy. One way or another, we're crafting things that mediate our experience of the world. Right, and that variability to think of, bowl and drone as, in the same sentence, shows just how broad that concept of technology really can be. So we have to be careful because it covers a lot of ground. What most of us think about with technology these days is information technology, the means by which we bring information, the way information and connection passes through devices and objects like this and this. But even those went back a long way, right? Smoke signals, writing, printing press. Wow, big deal when the printing press came along. Telegrams, telephones, radio, television, computers, all sorts of ways that we mediated some kind of information. So one way of thinking about it is that technology determines for us what is at hand. What is at hand? What's there for me to pick up and use? And at different times, at different points of history, different things have been there at hand. The things that are easy to come by, that we then use to help us act in the world and connect in the world. What are the tools that we have for encountering the world and acting in it? So the natural question to ask then is this technology neutral? Right? Are all these things just neutral? It's just stuff that helps me act in the world, and I can use it well or I can use it badly, but the technology itself is just neutral. And that's one way to come at it. And the only moral question or theological question is, how do I use the tool? Am I using it for good purposes or bad? But there have been lots of really interesting conversations going on, Marshall McLuhan being one of the earliest to raise this question for us, though before him Martin Heidegger was doing some fantastic stuff. I saved you from the long Martin Heidegger quote that I had up here. It was a good one, but that one's in a hidden slide that vanished. Marshall McLuhan, though, in 1964, some of you may even remember or have heard about his work, but he was the one who came up with the famous phrase, "The medium is the message." The medium is the message. He was talking about things like radio and television, and certainly would have talked about smartphones if they existed in his day. The medium, that is the piece of technology that mediates the communication, he says that is the message. It's not neutral. Now, he didn't mean necessarily that it is good or evil. He just meant it's not neutral in that it shapes the kinds of communication we're going to have. There are certain kinds of communication you can have with smoke signals, right? But you can't write a philosophical treatise with smoke signals. Just can't do it. There are kinds of communication you can have with radio. There are kinds of communication you can have with television and film. But each of those is shaped by the media, by the medium we choose to portray the communication. So think, for instance, about television and movies. Television and movies are great at mediating visual images. Right? They're not so great at mediating other things. For instance, surely many of us have had the experience of reading a really good novel and then watching the movie and being disappointed. Right? The movie, it's not as good as the novel. Right? We say that all the time. Why is that? Because a novel can do things that a movie can't do by virtue of the medium itself. You know what a novel can do? A novel, by virtue of its words and its wordiness, can get you inside a character's inner dialogue. It can describe things about a character's emotional state. It can describe things about what's going on in the character's head. Visually, you go to TV and movies, how do you do that? Right? I mean, some people, some just take the easy way and do a voiceover. So you can do voiceovers, but you know, you can't do voiceovers all the time. And some in movies feel like voiceovers are cheap. You know, a voiceover is cheap because it means you couldn't figure out a way to visually display something, so you had to have the character in the background going, "Here's what I'm thinking right now." Right? Now, you know, there are some movies that use a lot of voiceover that I really like, but most don't. Most want to say, "What can I show you visually?" Right? Which means if I'm going to capture anything about a character's inner life, somehow it has to get displayed in a way that's visual, that's external. Which means there are going to be certain kinds of limits. Think about TV news. TV news, because the visual that grips us, what is visually exciting to us, is exactly what TV news is going to go after, right? Because that's what the screen is good at, giving us things that are visually exciting. So the medium itself determines the way the news is going to get portrayed to us. They're going to find the things that are most visually exciting, which means they're going to tend toward the things that are scandalous, the things that have really, sort of shocking footage, which means you're going to get a skewed sense of the news if it's only coming through a screen, because that's what a screen does well. Print does something else well. And so this is the kind of thing Marshall McLuhan was noticing really early on, is that different forms of media do different things well, and the kind of thing that's going to come through it is going to be filtered by the type of media you use. Neil Postman, writing about 20 years later, says, how we are obliged to conduct conversations will have the strongest possible influence on what ideas we can conveniently express. Then he makes the comment about the smoke signals. Right? I mean, that's interesting. And I think it's the kind of thing that most of us don't pause and notice. But once you pause and notice it, you start realizing there's a kind of obviousness to it as well. Sherry Turkle wrote this great book. I stole her title as the title of my talk because I figured this talk was never going to get famous in a way that she would then track me down and say, why did you steal my title? Uh-oh, but it's, well, who knows, right? Hi, Sherry. But right, so she says this. She says, Sherry Turkle does work in the social sciences, so it's sort of crossover anthropology and sociology. She says, while my computer science colleagues, she was at MIT, while my computer science colleagues were immersed in getting computers to do ingenious things, I had other concerns. How were computers changing us as people? My colleagues often objected, insisting that computers were just tools, right? Here's the neutrality argument. It's just a tool. It doesn't change anything. You can use it for good things. You can use it for bad. It's just inert as a neutral object. She says, but I was certain that the just in that sentence was deceiving. We are shaped by our tools. We're shaped by our tools. And I think the more we think about it, the more it becomes kind of obvious. And if it doesn't become obvious, just go read her book and then it will. Right? But to jump back then to one last quote, Abraham Maslow, 1966. Right? So we're jumping back now, almost 50 years. I suppose it is tempting, if the only tool you have is a hammer, to treat everything as if it were a nail. There you go, right? Very pithy. He's got it. Tools shape us, because the tool you have then shapes how you see the stuff around you. I have a certain means of acting upon the world now that I have a cell phone in my hands. And therefore, I tend to act upon the world in exactly the ways that the cell phone has now made possible for me. If I have a hammer, then things tend to look like nails. So here's a moment for us to pause a little bit. And here's my question for you, for just a little bit of conversation. How do the technological tools that we have at hand, such as our smartphones, change the way you see or interact with the world? What do you think? How would you answer that? What do you see in your own life or in the life of those around you? How do you see the tools that you've got at hand changing or shaping the way you interact with the world? Please.
So we're on Facebook, and I honestly am very, very busy, and I'm pregnant, and I do not check my Facebook very much. We post pictures kind of on vacation or special family outings, and that's kind of it. And it's not really a conscious choice. I just have a lot going on.
Yeah.
And I have one of my best friends recently adopted a son. And we don't get to catch up as often as we would like. And I was texting with her the other day, because we both have small children, and she's, doing bath and dinner, and I'm trying to get through homework with ours. And so we're texting, and I say, I'd really like to see some pictures of the baby. I'd love to see. And she said, oh, well, I've been posting a lot of pictures on Facebook and Instagram. And I thought, you're like my best friend. Can you not just show me some pictures? and I'm excluded from her life in some ways unless I'm able to connect with that media that she is using to communicate what's going on with her family.
Yeah.
Maybe a little sad.
Yeah.
I still did not check my Facebook. I didn't.
Right. Yeah, that's a really interesting story. Yeah.
Something I get involved in a lot is like live classical music concerts. That's my thing, unlike the other ones. And a few seasons back, I was at the Metropolitan Opera, and there was a group of people that were trying to use their cell phones to record and view it, whatever. They were ejected by the guards and the ushers, largely due to copyright laws of what was going on the stage. Because that's another issue that people don't realize and don't have like a respect for.
Right.
Plus their fellow audience members. Myself personally, I have an iPhone. I'm not on Facebook. I don't want to be. I've got all my media things in there from apps that I can download freely, including like the Book of Common Prayer, where I can do my daily devotions wherever I am, plugging that in. That's something that wasn't addressed. There's a lot of good things, but then there's also people need to realize what is appropriate and what is not appropriate use.
Yeah, and being able to figure that out is exactly the question, right?
The balance of also with the respect for people, like you're at a performance, you're at a church service, you're at a lecture, unless you're dying, keep your cell phone.
Yeah, I mean, part of me almost wishes church were so exciting that everybody was doing this, I mean, just for like one Sunday, and then we could tell everybody, please don't do that because nobody can see. But just once, I want all the cell phones up. Like, this is too good to miss.
See, that could probably happen at the Bible church up here.
Maybe so. Yeah. Anna.
So, two things. I've been noticing lately in my own use of my phone sitting here on the table, that I've been getting better because I realized how bad I was getting. I've been getting better at not picking it up when I'm with you.
Yeah.
Because when I pick up my phone and I'm in a room full of people, it's as if I'm trying to have a relationship with somebody who's actually not in this room. And that's just not really respectful to all the people who are here. On the other hand, I realized that my phone is on the desk, on the table, because there was a quote that you put up that I really wanted. And the fastest way I could get the quote was to take a picture of it. So I took out my phone and I turned on the camera, and then I'm still listening to you, and I just put down the phone and turned off the camera. And I'm handing you my card because I really would like you to send me that quote.
I love it.
And it dawned on me that this is exactly what we're talking about. Can we have a relationship based on what the conversation is, rather than me having a relationship between my brain and the words on the page,
screen.
Which is turning you into your product into a novel.
Yeah.
And you're speaking into a product.
Yeah, that's a really interesting observation.
So it's homecoming weekend for the school district where we are part of, and so Mackenzie, my freshman, is going out to dinner with a bunch of friends, and they were trying to coordinate how they were going to get and meet up at this Olive Garden before the festivities were going to begin. And so I was the driver, and I had a couple of them in the back, and we get to Olive Garden, we're waiting, and they don't show up, and so we go inside and realize that we're at the wrong Olive Garden. So then they start texting each other, trying to figure out what the right Olive Garden was. And so then we go to another place, not the right one again, because 635 and 75 have a million Olive Gardens right there. So after we're at the second wrong one, they start texting. I said, no, I am not driving one more mile until you talk to each other. I mean, they didn't even pick up the phone and try to negotiate location. They just kept on trying to create more and more confusion around who was right and all these dinging things going on. I was like, oh my gosh. And the response was, well, we don't do that anymore. You don't actually pick up the phone and use that part of you don't use the phone part of the phone anymore. And it was just so amazing that they couldn't they all looked up in unison what?
Right. Who are you? Are you old or something?
I know,
Right? It's
I'm
like,
actually kind of not the nerdy, weird mom. I'm usually the one
Yeah.
that's, and they just feel like, oh,
right. Couldn't quite imagine.
I can't actually.
Yeah.
Voices.
I wanna jump ahead to a couple other things, and then we're gonna come back and do some broader discussion again. But I want to get a couple more ideas out on the table, and then we'll just open it up for conversation as long as we want to stick around. Sherry Turkle's book on the Alone Together book asks this question: what is media technology doing to our relationships? And this is where it kind of really rubber hits the road around those questions of isolation and disconnection, and how media is involved in that. Again, not that it's the enemy, but does it call forth certain kinds of possibilities? Does it put at hand certain modes of interacting that become so easy that they become second nature to us, right? They become the quick go-to. So this was one of the quotes from her book. These days, insecure about our relationships and anxious about intimacy, we look to technology for ways to be in relationships and protect ourselves from them at the same time. And I thought that was really interesting, right? To be in relationships and protect ourselves from them at the same time. In some ways, I watch my kids, especially my oldest son, my 15-year-old, having more contact with his friends than I ever did at that age. And yet, there's also a sense that the means by which they do that is also a form of protection. It's a form of detachment that keeps you from being too connected. Now, I'm not saying that's always true, but it certainly seems like Turkle's onto something here, maximizing certain types of interaction that themselves aren't the interactions of person-to-person, face-to-face, interactions that involve a touch, interactions that involve something that is a human intimacy that you can't get through a text, right? So texts, lots and lots more, lots and lots more just connectivity in that sense than I ever experienced, but in some ways less getting together. And sometimes we'll ask Nolan, don't you want to get together with your friends? Don't you want to have them over? And he's like, well, yeah, maybe, but we just text a lot. And so it's like, okay, that and maybe that's a guy. I don't know. Girls may all still get together, but I have 3 boys, so that's what I see. So it's an interesting observation that she makes. She also says this: digital connections and the sociable robot. That's another piece of this book that I'm not going to get into now, but the rise of the sociable robot, robots that not only sort of do certain functions for us, but become companions, especially things like robot pets that are becoming a big deal in certain, say, nursing homes or assisted living centers where it's much easier to have a robot pet. You don't have to clean up after them. You don't have to feed them. And so robot pets are becoming a big deal as a companion, right? So there's something sort of interesting and strange about that. And yet when Turkle interviews people, they'll talk about how comforting it is to have this robot pet that can sort of, climb up in bed with them. And so it's this odd thing, but that's part of the next wave, is where robotics is going. Well, a stuffed animal that can move around like a robot and respond to you. It's sort of fascinating what's going on. But she says, these may offer the illusion of companionship without the demands of friendship. Our network life allows us to hide from each other even as we are tethered to each other. We'd rather text than talk. So obviously she's wanting to push the negative aspect of this, the things that might get lost. She wants to bring to the foreground. As she notes, working at MIT, most of the people she works with just think the more technology, the better, the smarter you can make the technology, the more it's going to help us. And she keeps having to be the one asking the questions, but what does this do to our humanity? Right? What kind of people does this turn us into if we embrace these new technologies you're making possible? They're not simply neutral. Again, it's not that they're evil or good. It's that they change the way we communicate, and have we become attentive to those changes, and do we want those changes? Now I'm going to go theological on you for a minute, right? We've been talking a lot about sort of cultural things and cultural analysis of technology and where things are going. I want to talk just for a minute about sacraments, because sacrament is at the heart of how Christians think about things mediating relationship. And you remember my definition of technology, I was pulling up a few slides back, was that technology is about creating things that mediate relationship or connection, right? A tool that helps me act upon the world, a phone that helps me call and connect to someone else. Sacraments are the way that we fundamentally, as a community, see stuff: bread, wine, oil, water, stuff becoming able to mediate personal presence. What comes through the wine and the bread? Body and blood of Christ. What comes through the waters of baptism? What comes through the oil by which we anoint? The presence of God. We have this idea that things of this earth can mediate divine presence in really powerful ways. And so what I want to suggest is that sacrament is one place we go to figure out theologically what it looks like for stuff to mediate relationship. And by that I mean not just be a purveyor of relationship, but to pull the two things together rather than to push the two things apart. The idea that the body and blood of Christ are present in some mysterious way in bread and wine means that when I engage the mediation, which is the bread and wine, I'm actually engaging the one on the other side, right? We are coming together. What we have isn't keeping us apart, it's making us one. And to me, this has helped me think about technology, because technology, or media, is mediation. It's that between which our communication, our lives, our connections flow. So it becomes a way of kind of testing technology and asking that question. If we're a sacramental people, we think at its height, right? The sacraments are the places where we see mediation happening exactly as it should. The very presence of the other becomes part of me, right? As closely bound as we can become. So then we have a question to ask of other kinds of media or mediation or technology that seeks to connect. Is the other being brought to me in such a way that we're drawn into one another's lives, right? To use the sacramental language, do we begin in any way to participate in the life of the other? Or does the object end up getting in the way of the participation? And now I'm thinking back to filming my son's cute little thing at school and thinking all he sees is the back of my phone. There's a failed moment for me, right? And if I think about it sacramentally, it's a failed moment because in that moment I had the chance to connect with what he was doing, and instead this actually stood between us, even though I thought it was helping the connection. So sacraments are a way of maybe giving us an image of what a kind of perfected mediation might look like, and thereby a way of testing other kinds of mediation or technology. Now, I had to add this. There are some churches that are moving communion itself online. So if you can get online sacraments, I don't know if it does the same kind of work anymore. I got to say I'm slightly skeptical, but I did find on the website of Saddleback Church how to take communion online. It begins with purchasing your grape juice.
Snap a quick photo.
Yeah, and then snap a photo of yourself and send it in to us, right? So Right, so there are churches where even the sacramental life, which is so physical and so tangible and so much about the way that God can inhabit materiality and that can pull us together into the life of God, even that becomes virtual. As long as you can buy some grape juice and crackers before the service begins. Saddleback's not the only one. Actually, there was a United Methodist Church in North Carolina that was going to start online communion. Luckily, the Methodist Conference of North Carolina shut that down fairly quickly. I got to say, I think it was the right move. But lots of folks are asking these kinds of questions. Can we take even the sacramental life and make it virtual? So, media, technology needs to be tested by what it mediates. What's passing through it? Is it mediating connection or disconnection? Marketing, manipulation, bullying, envy, friendship, love? Right? What's it mediating? What's passing through? And is it constructed in such a way that it's more likely to mediate one of those things than another? And then the answer may be as simple as it is hard. Right? Does this technology or communications tool help us keep Jesus' command to love God and love our neighbor? Do I love God and love my neighbor better because I have this tool that's allowing me to do that? Or am I somehow failing to love my neighbor? Am I maintaining a kind of easy disconnection from my neighbor because I can create a sort of ersatz connection through my phone, but a connection that means I then no longer feel the same responsibility to actually show up at their house with a meal. But I can sure write a nice thing on Facebook saying, so sorry, hope your surgery went well, send. And does that become a way by which I now no longer feel the need to go and become present? Does it call me to love God and neighbor better than I did before? I think technology can do that. I just think we have to be really attentive to asking the question. And so now I'm just going to toss this open to whatever discussion we have, whatever kind of time we have. I threw out some questions that you can look at. I don't have to read them all through. You can probably read them faster than I can read them out loud. Just as ways maybe to get us started, but you don't have to feel bound by these questions. We can take the conversation where you'd like for the discussion to go. But I'm open for any of you to, if you'd like, pick one of these questions and feel free to get us started. Yeah, please.
I want to say on the discipline side, I was just thinking about this when you said this just now. Like, I think Sunday's a day of rest thing, the Bible says that. And so I kind of purposefully don't I leave it at home whenever I can. And I actually had some people I had to give some information to. I'm in the choir, and some people in the choir needed some stuff.
Yeah.
And I just got their email. I'll email it to them tomorrow. And it's kind of weird to do that because sometimes it's useful, but having that one day of rest thing, where you don't let those things in. It's like a boundary thing, which kind of ties in on that.
Yeah, that's really nice. We do that in our family too. The kids have no screen time on Sunday, either TV or gaming. Occasionally the parents cheat, which is a terrible message to send. But we're trying real hard. Usually when we cheat, it's because we've got work to prep for Monday morning, which is also a bad message to be sending. So we're working on this. But that's our goal as a family, is to have one day where we're not plugged into a screen. Yeah, Anna?
I'm thinking about the second question. I used to watch a lot of television news, and now I barely watch television news. I prefer to get my news from either NPR or a newspaper, even though the newspapers are like a day late. And because what I found was happening with the TV news was it was just getting all sensationalized and all kinds of fear mongering, and you can see it especially this last couple of weeks with Ebola. And it's just, now I just don't even think about it. And I remember when I was younger, I used to be a news junkie. And it didn't used to be as bad as it is now. And in the last 10, 15 years, it's just gotten really ridiculous.
Yeah.
So I just don't watch.
Yeah, and there are other things behind that. One of them is that's what TV does best. That's what visual images do best, is to give us something that's really visually engaging, and that which is shocking and sensationalist is most visually engaging, which is why you see fewer stories about, you know, so-and-so did a really nice thing today and brought some food to the hungry, you know, and you've got to, you know, how do you visually show that? Here's some people handing over some, it doesn't have nearly the same level of visual engagement, even though it might be a really important story.
Scott,
Yeah.
on that, my thought.
Yeah.
I don't watch it either, and the reason is, and I don't have my cell phone with me because it's in the car because I didn't want to have to be interrupted. The other thing is, you have Google. You can't miss anything, you can always find it. So I don't have to worry about that anymore.
Yeah, yeah.
But I lost my train of thought. But it opens you up to so many options, but you also have to have the discipline to say, I don't need it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And the notion of immediacy, it's all right if I reply tomorrow. I don't really have to reply today.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what's going to happen? The world isn't going to come to an end. It's
Yeah.
There's a sense that you're allowing others to have control, and that's why I don't watch the news. I am giving up my freedom and letting you or somebody else decide what I think or what's important.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the phone now, you have so much information, you can choose what's important.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to let someone else who, if you talk with them, that idiot? Why am I following with that idiot? He thinks it's important. I can decide for myself.
Yeah,
and that's a really positive use of the technology.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah.
Something that I've always gone by as well, and over the years I've spent a good deal of business and pleasure time in the Big Apple. People get out and walk and talk to each other. They go out for their morning walks. They talk, they interact with each other, which doesn't happen in a city or whatever, that everybody's in a car by themselves, or they're on a dark train and they've got their earbuds in. The other thing is, I've always gone by the adage that was famously put in print many years ago by the original Dear Abby: the person in front of you is always more important than the one on the other end of the phone.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that goes for going to parties and seeing people that are, you know, why they bother to come? Because they're missing out so much.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's just not a good way to live your life. Healthy balance, psychologically and also philosophically. People need to know when it's appropriate, when it's not appropriate. A lot of that is getting missed.
Mm-hmm.
You can do a lot of good with that piece of technology that fits in your palm, but also it can take over your life.
Mm-hmm.
Because a couple of years ago I was in a car wreck from some girl texting while driving. She broadsided my seven-month-old car that I wound up with fractured ribs and et cetera. The fire department and the police had to take her phone away from her to get her to answer questions. And I thought, where is common sense has gone out the window? It's just,
Yeah, yeah.
you know, it's a matter of etiquette for one thing.
Right.
It doesn't exist
Right.
anymore.
Right, yeah. But as you note, safety as well.
I think it's interesting, especially when we consider the youth and what children are growing up with as far as technology today. It's interesting to think about, especially as parents, our roles as kind of stewards of this technology, because technology is really important. And I kind of, listening to a lot of people, probably feel like I consume maybe a little more technology than maybe other people, and then I see what my son is exposed to, and I'm a Montessori teacher by trade, and I am certainly not opposed to technology, but within my classroom environment, which is pre-K and K, there's certainly technology. Our kindergartners go to a technology class where they learn a bit about computers, but So I think it's very important at a young age for them to kind of be able to develop with limited technology. But as my son has started elementary school this year, he's in first grade, and I see how valuable the technology that they use within his classroom can be for learning and to really give them tools. And his teacher, I feel really fortunate that his teacher actually has her master's degree in technology and education. And she has so many wonderful ideas about how to use the technology, not only in the classroom, but how you can help your children to navigate technology and be responsible consumers of technology at home. And one thing she said at the very beginning of the year when we went in to meet the teacher that I found so fascinating is that, you know, when you look at the youth of today, and you imagine the types of jobs that they have when they are graduating, you know, from college, from graduate school, et cetera, a lot of those jobs don't even exist now. They will come as a result of technologies that are being created now. And if you think about all of the, like the .com billionaires, you think of what's going on in Silicon Valley, you think of the expansion of all of these apps and people who made money from creating apps. And so I think it's really important to, you know, while understanding that maybe technology is not neutral, also understanding that it can be really valuable and that we have to help children, especially as they navigate that path, because it's going to be a much bigger part of their future than it is of ours.
Yeah, absolutely so. And certainly as a professor, it's you know, one of the positives is technology mediates a lot of really important information quickly and easily for my students. So, so they can access a lot of really interesting online articles, academic papers, academic books, articles for a general audience. They can access all of that fairly quickly. And that's awesome because it gives them a window into a lot of different conversations that they can then bring back into the classroom. So absolutely, there are ways that, that it does actually mediate connection, and in that sense, connection to a host of ideas that it would have taken them much longer to find if they had to go find every individual book, every individual article in a journal. So, so it broadens their ability to be intellectually engaged with this breadth of ideas. Yeah. Yeah, please. And then over.
It's more, I have a statement too. It doesn't seem like the young people of today are wired like we are. I mean, we don't. That's what my problem is. They feel like they're wired like we are. Is that possible?
Depends on what you mean by wired. Because there's wired and then there's wired, and I'm not sure.
And the child to come and tell you what is hurting you. Verbalize this to me.
Yeah.
Tell me what's hurting you, and they can't do that. You know, and I mean, I know that they're into the texting and all of that other stuff, which I really won't use, but I choose not to use it. I simply said I'm not going to do that. If I want to talk to you, I'll pick up the phone. If you want to talk to me, you pick up the phone.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I think that that you know, I don't feel like they're wired that differently from the way I am, but I do think, you know, with each generation there are new technologies that the previous generation didn't have, and I think that there's always, I mean, if you think about cars and telephones and TVs and, you know, and I'll talk to my son about, you know, if you think when mommy was a little girl, there were no cell phones, and then I can remember, like, in the 80s, I can remember I had this crazy algebra teacher who would bring her enormous cell phone into school with her, and he just thinks that's wild. But then we talk about when my mom was growing up, and they only had black and white television, and there was no like DVD and no, you know. So I think there is a small disconnect between each generation, and you know, I think it is important to. And I mean, you've got young boys too, but I think it's important to approach it perhaps with an open mind. I think we all make personal decisions for what our level of comfort with the technology is. But I think approaching it with an open mind is really important, because you don't want to, again, maybe that technology isn't your favorite way of connecting, but you don't want to disconnect from a person either, because that's not your chosen method of communication. I don't know if that makes sense.
Don't throw out the baby with the bathwater.
Yeah.
Well, and then that's part of the thing about all of these technologies as they've arisen historically. The fact that they're not neutral, again, doesn't mean that they are by nature good or bad, but it does mean they shape our conversations in certain ways. And that's what we have to be attentive to. If the only way we choose to communicate with others is through texting, it means there are other kinds of communication we're missing out on that might actually create a different level of intimacy that is healthy for us as human beings. Right? But that's not to say that, if I need to text my wife, right before I head home and say, hey, I'm heading home, I'll see you in 3 hours. Awesome, that's actually kind of really useful, and it's very quick, and she knows I'm on the road, and right, so a lot of it is finding that way to ask the right kinds of questions about what's going on and not simply be reactive. But sometimes I think we don't know which questions to ask, and so we then just sort of give in to what I think tends to be the prevailing mode in culture, which is if we can do it, we should. If we've created this cool new thing, we all ought to use it. And that goes in all sorts of media technology, it goes with military technology. If we have the capacity to create it, we should use it. And my sense is we just need to pause at that moment. Yes, we have the capacity to create this, and surely somebody will. The question of how, if, when we're going to use it is a question that still belongs to each of us. And it belongs to us as a church community to be in a conversation about if we're the kind of people who feel like part of our calling in the midst of a world that's isolated and fragmented is trying to pull people back together, then what's our posture toward different kinds of technologies in light of that goal, right? And not a lot of places where that question is going to get asked. And it's part of why it's so important we still have churches where people gather together and ask these questions with one another, I saw a hand over here. I want to let Carolyn get in and then back to Shelley.
This is not a question. I don't even know if it enters into the total, but I think it does. I started reading science fiction when I was about 8th grade, a long time ago. Somewhere, I think, teenage years or early 20s, and I don't know who wrote this story, short story. But just looking at this big screen makes me nervous because of that story. And I know screens are bigger in movie houses than they even were when I was a little girl. But I pictured the big TV screen as big as the wall over here. In the story, the children had their little control like this. The parents aren't at home. The children pulled up a beautiful view of the jungle on their screen. And they put in some ferocious lions on that screen. And they put their parents in that screen, and the lions ate up the parents. And the parents were never seen again. That's a long time ago, but that makes me wonder about the far side of our technology and where we're going.
Yeah, and those are great questions to be asking. What's the trajectory we're on, right?
And I mean, that was a very frightening thing. I just thought, good Lord.
That sounds like a great story.
And it sounds like we are a lot closer to that now than we used to be.
Let me let Shelley jump in.
Well, my question really, and perhaps Emily and Erica, you know the answer to this question, but as an institution and as a community who wants to model an ethical use of technology, are there resources to enable us to be able to do that other than our own minds, and imaginations, and conversations, so that we can be overt about how we do this as opposed to having it be a hidden curriculum. I'm not saying that very well.
Yeah.
Where the ethics of using technology is not just something that we try to model, but that we can actually teach it as we're doing it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I think there are increasingly are good resources out there for thinking about that. A friend of mine, Brent Latham, wrote a book last year, maybe the year before. It's something like I play, I pray, it's a sort of play on I everything, right? I work, I play, I pray, or something. And he does a really nice job of thinking through some of these things. There's another one, Habits of the High-Tech Heart, I think. It's an older book. So one of the things about writing about technology is that it gets dated really quickly because as people read it, they're like, oh my gosh, we're talking about MySpace, you know, and so it's right. So it's hard because even though the insights might be great, you know, unless you're willing to update it all, sort of do the translating in your head, it feels dated, you know, 5 years after it's written or sometimes less. There was a great PBS documentary that sort of hits on these things, but it was way back in 1999. Wow, ancient. Called Merchants of Cool, and it was actually about marketing to teenagers, but a lot of it sort of overlapped with technology issues. And again, it's like, you know, one of those things where I've used it in class and I have to say to the students, you know, please don't get bogged down with the fact that they're talking about Britney Spears as the big new thing, right? That's not the point. You know, fill in, you know, Miley Cyrus and you'll be fine. You know, there's always a correlate to whoever that, right? But so the pop culture references all get dated really quickly, but you can actually find that one online. It's you can watch the full documentary. It's called Merchants of Cool. Yeah, it was NPR or a PBS Frontline special. Yeah, please.
I think one thing we need to address is the third question: how do we avoid letting technology make us more alone together? And I think that's just by reaching out. I get in the office elevator every workday, and whether there are 3 or 5 people looking at their phone, in the old days we'd speak to each other. And so I continue to speak to people, whether they're on their phone or not. And I think it behooves us to think about not being shy in reaching out to each person as a human being, individual, because they may be hiding behind that and not realize that you can capture the moment by being with someone, even if it's 2 minutes in an elevator.
Yeah.
And all you can do is make the effort.
Yeah, thank you. And that actually ties back to what I was saying about affection this morning, the ways that we find those small opportunities to create affection within all these different moments of our lives. And with that comment, we're going to have to call it to a close because our time is up. But thank you, everyone. It's been a great conversation. I appreciate you inviting me.